Hey everyone! What if I told you that on March 18th, 2025, the state of Louisiana made history by executing a man using a method so controversial that the United Nations called it torture? We're diving deep into the case of Jessie Dean Hoffman Jr., a story that's got everything. A horrific crime from 1996, 27 years of transformation on death row, and an execution method that had witnesses describing it as prolonged and disturbed. This isn't just another death penalty case, folks. This is about the tension between justice and redemption, experimental execution methods, and a legal battle that reached all the way to the Supreme Court. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why this case has divided experts, judges, and even the victim's own family. So buckle up, because we're about to explore one of the most controversial executions in modern American history. The crime that started it all. November 1996. Let's start at the beginning. November 27th, 1996, the day before Thanksgiving. Mary Molly Elliott, a 28-year-old advertising executive, was just trying to get home to her husband after a long day at work in New Orleans. But as she walked to her car in the Sheraton parking garage, her life took a horrifying turn. Jessie Hoffman Jr., an 18-year-old valet who'd been working there for less than 3 weeks, approached her with a gun. What happened next was absolutely devastating. Hoffman forced Molly into her own car at gunpoint and made her drive to an ATM. And here's where it gets chilling. The security cameras captured the pure terror on her face as she withdrew $200 while Hoffman stood right beside her. But guys, the nightmare was just beginning. Instead of letting her go, Hoffman forced her to drive to a remote area in St. Tammany Parish. There, he sexually assaulted her in the back of her car. And then, and this is the part that sealed his fate, he made her walk naked down a trash-strewn path to a dock on the Middle Pearl River. At that dock, Hoffman made Molly kneel and shot her once in the head, execution style. Her body was found the next day, Thanksgiving morning, by a duck hunter. The investigation moved quickly. That valet jacket visible on the ATM footage led police straight to Hoffman. When questioned, his story kept changing. First an alibi, then claims about being forced by other men, and finally a confession where he claimed the gun went off accidentally. But here's the thing about accidents. They don't usually happen after kidnapping, robbery, and rape, do they? Two faces of Jessie Hoffman Jr. Now, this is where the story gets complicated, and honestly, it's what makes this case so fascinating and heartbreaking at the same time. On one side, we have the 18-year-old monster who committed this horrific crime. The jury saw the evidence, heard his changing stories, and unanimously recommended death. They found the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel, legal language that basically means it was absolutely brutal. But then there's the other Jessie Hoffman, the one who emerged after spending over 27 years on death row. His childhood was a horror story in itself. We're talking about abuse so severe that a social worker said it was the worst she'd ever seen, and the records literally filled a small U-Haul truck. His mother would hold his hands over a hot stove burner until they blistered. Beatings with extension cords, a padlocked refrigerator, police called to their home dozens of times, and yet somehow this kid managed to be a straight-A student and star quarterback through 11th grade. I mean, talk about compartmentalization. Most of us can barely manage our fantasy football teams while dealing with regular life stress. But here's where it gets really complex. During his 27 years on death row, Hoffman's supporters claim he underwent a complete transformation. He became a devoted Buddhist, spending his time in meditation, mentoring other inmates, and even becoming a father and husband while incarcerated. In 2023, he wrote an apology letter to the Elliott family saying, "I am extremely and genuinely sorry for all the pain that my very selfish, horrible, and heartless acts have caused you all." But here's the catch. Molly's husband, Andy Elliott, said years later that Hoffman had never offered any explanation or remorse directly to him. So who's right? Was Hoffman truly remorseful, or was it all just legal maneuvering? This contradiction is at the heart of what makes this case so divisive. Louisiana's desperate search for a new way to kill. Here's something most people don't realize. Louisiana hadn't executed anyone for 15 years before Hoffman, not because they didn't want to, but because they literally couldn't get the drugs for lethal injection. Pharmaceutical companies have been refusing to sell their products for executions, and honestly, can you blame them? It's not exactly great for the corporate image to have your company logo associated with death row. So when Governor Jeff Landry got elected on a platform promising to resume executions, Louisiana had a problem. How do you kill someone when you can't get the usual tools? Enter nitrogen hypoxia, a method so new and controversial that only Alabama had tried it before Louisiana. The state legislature quickly authorized it in 2024, and Louisiana basically copied Alabama's protocol. Hey, if you're finding this as fascinating and disturbing as I am, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into cases like this. Trust me, we're just getting to the most shocking part, the execution itself. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. The method that shocked the world. Now, let's talk about nitrogen hypoxia, because this is where things get really controversial. The theory sounds simple enough. You put a mask over someone's face and pump in pure nitrogen gas instead of oxygen. They're supposed to just drift off peacefully as their body is deprived of oxygen. Sounds almost humane. Wrong. The United Nations human rights experts called it potential torture. The American Veterinary Medical Association says nitrogen gas is unacceptable for euthanizing most mammals because of distressing side effects like panic and seizures. Let me repeat that. It's considered too cruel for animals, but Louisiana decided it was just fine for humans. And then there's the Alabama precedent. Remember Kenneth Smith? Witnesses described him shaking violently, convulsing, and writhing on the gurney for extended periods. This was supposed to be quick and painless. Even the companies that make medical-grade nitrogen, Airgas, Air Products, and Matheson Gas all publicly refused to let their products be used for human executions. So, where exactly was Louisiana getting its nitrogen from? The whole thing started to look less like justice and more like a dangerous experiment with a human guinea pig. The final 24 hours, a legal roller coaster, March 18, 2025, execution day. But it almost didn't happen. Hoffman's legal team launched a desperate final assault in the courts. They had two main arguments, both of which were compelling. First, the Eighth Amendment claim that nitrogen hypoxia constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. They had expert testimony from anesthesiologist Dr. Philip Bickler, who stated the method would likely cause conscious terror and psychological pain, right up until the person loses consciousness. But here's the really interesting part. They also made a religious freedom argument. Hoffman was a practicing Buddhist, and his faith required him to engage in meditative breathing at the moment of death to ensure peaceful reincarnation. But how can you meditate and control your breathing when you have an airtight gas mask sealed over your face? The legal system went absolutely crazy. U.S. District Judge Shelley Dick issued an injunction stopping the execution. Then, Louisiana District Court Judge Richard Moore issued another stay on the grounds of religion. For a moment, it looked like Hoffman might live to see another day. However, the conservative Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals intervened and lifted both stays. Just like that, the execution was back on. The final hope was the U.S. Supreme Court. And this is where it gets really interesting. The court voted 5-4 to deny the stay. But here's the kicker. Conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch joined the three liberal justices in voting to stop the execution. Gorsuch wrote that the lower courts had no business deciding how Hoffman should practice his religion. Even he thought there were serious problems with this execution. But 5 votes beat 4, and at 6:21 p.m., Louisiana was cleared to proceed. The execution, prolonged and disturbed, What happened next contradicted everything state officials had promised about a quick, humane death. Hoffman was strapped to a gurney and covered with a gray blanket. An industrial-style respirator mask was fitted over his face. And let me tell you, that description alone should tell you something about how medical this procedure really was. His Buddhist spiritual advisor was there, chanting prayers as the curtains opened to the viewing room. Then, at 6:21 p.m., the nitrogen gas began flowing. According to witnesses, Hoffman instantly began twitching. For the next 16 minutes, he exhibited what they called convulsive activity. His head was jerking, his hands were clenching, and he was moving and shaking on that gurney. I've seen people have less dramatic reactions to trying to assemble IKEA furniture, and that's genuinely torture for most of us. His last visible breath was recorded at 6:37 p.m. The nitrogen continued to flow until 6:40 p.m., a total of 19 minutes. He wasn't pronounced dead until 6:50 p.m. Louisiana corrections officials called the execution flawless and said the convulsions were expected side effects. Flawless. Witnesses described it as prolonged and disturbed, but apparently that's flawless in Louisiana's book. So here we are, folks. Jessie Dean Hoffman Jr. is gone, executed by a method that divided the Supreme Court and horrified international observers. The big questions remain. Was justice served for Molly Elliott's brutal murder? Or did Louisiana just conduct a cruel experiment on a man who had genuinely transformed over 27 years? Even Molly's own family was divided. Her husband felt bittersweet relief, while her sister-in-law publicly called for Hoffman to be pardoned, saying, "This is not justice in my name." What do you think? Should the death penalty focus on the crime committed or the person the defendant became? And is nitrogen hypoxia really more humane or just a desperate solution to the lethal injection drug shortage? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts on this incredibly complex case. If this deep dive into one of America's most controversial executions opened your eyes like it did mine, please hit that like button and subscribe for more in-depth true crime analysis. And definitely ring that notification bell, because next week we're diving into another shocking death row case that'll blow your mind. Speaking of which, our next video explores the final meals and last words of death row inmates, and trust me, some of these will absolutely shock you. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.